So thank you all very much for joining today. I hope you've got some lunch in front of you. If you're in the UK or in Europe, if you're further afield, it may well not be lunchtime, but hopefully you've at least got a drink. I'm going to start off with a couple of introductions. So first of all, I'm Felicity Allen. I'm the Commercial Director at Something Big. I head up our Client Services team. For those that don't know much about Something Big, we are a creative communications agency. And we are very much focused on people and planet communications. So anything that kind of makes ultimately a really meaningful difference. Unsurprisingly, accessibility fits in really nicely under sort of people and how we can better communicate with people. So I am joined today by Sarah. I'm going to hand over to you, Sarah, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Sarah Neale. I'm the Creative Services Director at Something Big. I've been with Something Big for about 11 years now, and I head up the design studio, working with the team on brand alignment and creative quality. So this falls perfectly in my remit.
Fantastic. So the good news for everybody today is you're only going to have a few moments of me talking, which makes a pleasant change. And Sarah is going to be taking you through most of today's session. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm just going to recap as to why it is, first of all, so important that we are all ensuring that our comms are accessible. There's a number of reasons, and I think the first one, obviously, is inclusion and equality. Ultimately, everybody deserves access to information and the sort of ability to participate. And we know that there is a huge diversity in terms of range of people who will really benefit from different sort of communications in terms of their accessibility. And this can include people with anything from visual impairments, so either blindness or low vision, hearing impairments, again, can be full deafness, but equally could be hard of hearing. People with learning disabilities, whether that's dyslexia, ADHD, equally mobility impairments, actually, the difficulty of using perhaps a mouse or a keyboard. We also need to factor in people that perhaps have cognitive impairments, so dementia, memory loss, and of course, people that have sort of limited English proficiency, if we're talking English or indeed whatever language we are talking in. Ultimately, accessible communications is ensuring that everybody has the opportunities to understand the message that we're trying to convey. And this is all about really trying to create a more inclusive environment where everybody can feel valued and ultimately empowered to participate. And accessible communications, I think they really demonstrates your commitment to diversity and inclusion within your workplace. And of course, that can only have a positive impact on brand perception. So that's the first point. The second is improved engagement and efficiency. So obviously, accessible communication allows you to reach a much larger audience, some of those which we've just talked about. And most importantly, it's actually including those that perhaps have felt previously excluded. This, of course, can translate into increased engagement with content, campaigns, communication. So ultimately, creating accessible communication right from the start will also ensure that you're being most efficient with your time and your budget, because actually tackling these things sort of front on is going to be far more efficient than kind of fixing accessibility issues later on. The third point, beyond regulations, it's simply good practice. Sarah's going to very much touch on this in the next sort of 20 minutes. And there are absolutely accessibility regulations that we should all be adhering to. But ultimately, we need to be demonstrating that accessibility goes way beyond just compliance. It's essentially an ethical kind of obligation, I would say, to ensure that everybody has access equally to the information. And then, we're talking about this from a business perspective. Let's not actually shy away from the fact that there's also a really good business case. So, if you make your communications accessible, that's going to open doors to potentially, a wider customer base. And of course, accessible communication just ultimately leads to a far better user experience for everybody. And that will ultimately translate into increased customer satisfaction and loyalty. So some great reasons why we should absolutely be, considering all of this. And to me, this, fact that is now on the screen just kind of really sums it up. At least 1 in 5 people in the UK, and this is just the UK, have a long-term illness, impairment or disability, and many more have a temporary disability. So we just think of how many people are going to be joining the call today, equally the wider number of people that will be listening to this on record. we need to make sure that we are communicating fairly with everybody. So without further ado, I think we've got a very strong case as to why accessible communications are important. I'm going to hand over to Sarah to give some insights as to how we can do it effectively.
Great. So how to create accessible documents. So for the purpose of this, I'll be discussing digital documents and reports, not websites or printed materials. There's certainly things in here that you can take on board for all of those, but that'll be the focus for today. We go flip, please. Thank you. So how do we know what is accessible and what requirements are needed to be met? So accessibility regulations came into force for public sector bodies in September 2018. These regulations are for websites, mobile applications, and intranets. But while these regulations aren't for everything, there are a set of rules that we can and we really should apply to create inclusive accessibility communications. So web content accessibility guides, known as WCAG, which is really catchy, are the fundamental standards that we should be following. The current version that they're working to is WCAG 2.2, and these guidelines focus on 4 key areas. So being perceivable, and this means being aware of something through sight, hearing, or other senses. Operable, the act of being able to use something regardless of ability. Understandable, being able to interpret and perceive the information or meaning being portrayed. And robust, so a product or system of products designed with full range of capabilities for that. Okay, so I'll be breaking those down today. And I'll be giving you some practical tips to ensure your documents are accessible to wider audiences and covering these topics. So format, readability, screen readers and voiceovers, navigation, typography, colour contrasts, forms, tables, diagrams and images. So a really wide range. So this may seem really obvious, but starting with format is the first thing, but understanding the final use of your document is the really key and the first thing you should be doing, because not one size fits all. Will your document be used online? So creating it landscape to fill the screen would be ideal to reduce scrolling, reduce extra clicks, reduce extra usability of your document. But you're also wanting to print it, so you probably want to stick to a standard A-size sheet, which will keep the print costs down. But creating an A4 portrait document for online viewing can be really tricky, and it does mean that the viewers may need to scroll or tab through. Also may need to zoom more to see the information. So this can also make screen readers really difficult because there'll be extra clicks and extra tabs, extra things for the reader to read. So it's really important to think about this first. And you may want to consider creating 2 documents, one that's digitally accessible, so landscape, and then one that's better for print, so A4 portrait, for example. It's the first point to remember. Okay, so then readability. The Literacy Trust suggests that the average reading age of the UK population, so again, just the UK, is 9 years old. So meaning that content should be written with this in mind so that it can be fully understood by a wide range of audiences. This also goes if you've got a multicultural workforce, as Felicity touched on earlier. If English isn't their first language, it can be really difficult to understand if it's very complex writing. As well as visually, when you're writing, using things like headings and short paragraphs, bullet points, also imagery will help break up the text and reduce reading fatigue. There are tools such as the Hemingway editor, which is the example on the screen here, that suggests ways to simplify content and restructure sentences that can be really helpful to achieve this level of readability. And keeping in mind as well that our world is neurodiverse, there are, we've all got different, we're all different, we all have different needs. 1 in 10 of us are dyslexic, for example. Some people like to read, some people like to listen. So it's just about giving a real range of options to suit people's needs as well. Great, so then going on to people listening, screen readers. So they do what they say, really. They read the content on the screen, kind of simply put. And they can be the only way some people are able to access your document. So meaning it's a really key piece of the accessibility puzzle, which is really often forgotten about or left till the last minute and not done very well. So we're going to play an example of a screen reader reading a very basic document.
Impact Report FY24 Who we are about something big. Something big is the creative communications agency committed to making a meaningful difference through both the work we produce and the way we do business.
So that is just a standard PDF reader, and it's very robotic, very mechanical. If you're listening to that for a long period of time, that's going to be very tiresome and very, not very comfortable for a reader, for a listener. So this is where we can go the extra mile, and we can really take it extra, take it extra for the experience of the listener. And we can create a voiceover version, which we are going to share an example of now.
Impact Report FY24 Who we are about something big. Something big is the creative communications agency committed to making a meaningful difference through both the work we produce and the way we do business.
I think there was a little bit of echo there, but you'll notice that is obviously much nicer to listen to. There's much more enthusiasm and passion there. You can also give your information in a much more enthusiastic, engaging way. And that was actually created by AI. So it's a very cost-effective and easy way to create a voiceover. If you're changing your document, making amends, updating wording, very easy to change, and cost-effective as well. It's something that is a real key example of something that will make the user experience of your document drastically improved. Really, really useful. And then also, if you're using videos within documents, just make sure that your videos have subtitles and captions as well, just to cover all bases. So the next point then is about navigation. So not only does navigation make it easier to move around a document, so clicking to the next page, it also makes it easier to skip to sections. Navigations are used by screen readers and people with who don't use mice, for example, so they're possibly tabbing through the document. As a minimum, navigation should include next and back buttons, but also a back to contents so that you can navigate to a specific section. If you're on a screen reader and it's reading everything through, you don't want to be then having to tab through or click through all the pages to get to the one section you want to. So you need to be able to jump. They should be positioned at the top of the page, starting left, so that it's the first thing that's read visually, but also by the screen reader. They should be predictable in function and not too fussy in design, so not to confuse visually or to confuse the screen reader. This on the top of our page here is a fairly basic example, but it's very functional. And it uses a slight design flourish with the little home icon on the left-hand side, which is the back to contents button. This would also be tagged for the screen reader with a back to contents button, so it'll be read like that. But things like that just add a little bit of extra flourish, but are very usable for the screen readers. Okay, so then typography. So this is where the standards really kick in. These are there are 3 levels to the WCAG 2.2 guidelines, which start off with A. So the minimum level of accessibility has been met, and this is the bare minimum. So this is the lowest level. AA, and this is where this is generally seen as an acceptable level of accessibility, which is what most documents should comply to, and we'll be focusing on when we talk about photography on the next typography, on the next slide. And then AAA, so this is the highest standard, and it's usually only government websites that meet these standards. With this, it's so important to ensure also that you're testing throughout your document and just make sure that a small amend to a colour doesn't completely ruin all your accessibility throughout. So just ensure you're testing throughout the entirety of creating your document. So going on to typography, and this is for standards of AA standards, which is the middle range. Text should have visual hierarchy, so not only from a visual point of view, but also when tagged in the PDF. So tagging uses H1, H2 tags, which are commonly used on websites. These tags help the screen reader understand what is a heading and what isn't, to ensure the emphasis and pauses are correct. Next up being font legibility, so sans serif fonts, so fonts with flourishes, they should be used for the body copy, whereas serif fonts are generally fine for larger copy, so just larger headings, sorry, so keep that in mind. Font sizes, we should be aiming for 16 pixels or 12 point for digital viewing as a minimum. Obviously, larger is better. And then capitals should be avoided. So as screen readers basically read all capitals as individual letters. So if that typography was all caps, it would be TYP, you know, and that would be quite horrible as a user. So opt for sentence case instead. Line spacing, giving text room to breathe. So there's visible line space, white space between the lines, basically. But being said, do not justify text. Not only does the sporadic line spacing make it really difficult to read, and it'll confuse the screen reader, basically. It doesn't know the flow of the sentence. It will pause, it'll start and stop at wrong places, so just don't justify. And then our last typography tip is to ensure that we're using AA colour contrast, which I will talk about next. So colour contrast is a bit of a science. It's the difference between the brightness in the foreground and the background. So, for example, if you're viewing your phone in bright sunshine and you keep having to turn the brightness up and you can't quite see it, it's still not easy to read. That could be someone's experience of your document if you're not considering colour contrast. Colour blindness affects 1 in 12 people in the UK and ranges across the whole colour spectrum. So you're never going to catch everybody, but if you are taking into consideration that some people can't see some colours, you need to make sure that the information makes sense without colour, basically. So there are some great tools online to check the colour contrast, which I will share at the end. But also it's worth considering a dark mode option. So again, doing a second version of your document, which has a dark background and light text on it, to give the audience the option, depending on their preferences and what works best for them. And there's some great examples of what works and what doesn't work there. Great. So how do we make your information work without colour? And this can be really difficult, especially for tables and diagrams, etc. But, you know, there's often a lot of information needed to be understood. But there are ways of doing this by using patterns, for example, as well as colour. If you're not able to differentiate the two colours, then using the patterns in the data can really help cover the bases and ensures that it's legible and understandable. This example here uses a different pattern in the colours of the pie chart so that if you can't see the colour, you can still see the pattern. But you could be relying on screen reader as well to relay this information to you. So it's vital that you are setting the reading order of forms and tables and diagrams so that it makes sense to the reader in an understandable way, and reads in an understandable way. Or as an alternative, think about creating a voiceover version. So for example, if this was read by a standard screen reader, it would be reading the numbers of the pie chart first and then reading the key. So that doesn't really make sense. So if we were to do a VO of this, you would set it to read it in a way. So something, for example, the data shows 331 people said yes to this question. So it would be a much more user-friendly, much more understandable way of doing it. And again, like I said, VOs are cost-effective, and it doesn't have to be a real person. It could just be an AI. So it just covers. It reduces the complexity of it. Great, so then imagery. So imagery is often a really important part of an experience for a user and can reduce understanding if it's not done correctly. Screen readers will look for alt text. So again, this is quite web-based wording, but it will look for the tag basically that explains what the image is. Alt text descriptions should be really specific and succinct, so no waffling and detail about what they're wearing, unless it's making sense to the article. But for example, this article here is talking about the secrets of living longer, and the image enhances the story by adding the alt text. So along the lines of older couple having fun on a sunny day. This supports the article. It gives the listener the full experience and understanding as well. So really useful and is needed for certain websites and things like that. Is legislation now to do that. Okay, so unimportant, oh sorry Charlie, one more back please. So unimportant features on the side here. So we've got this nice little squiggle. It's not adding to the experience. It's not making it reducing the understanding if you don't know that it's there. So you can mark that as decorative as well. So the screen reader won't read it, won't know it's there, and it's not needed. So that's fine. Thank you. Okay, so like I said earlier, accessibility shouldn't be the last thing that you check. It should be checked throughout the entirety of your document, and just checking everything as you go. And that's colour, that's readability, that's the whole thing we've talked about today. Microsoft has accessibility tools within all of their programs, where you can check and easily fix issues as well. In PowerPoint, you can inspect without colour. So this is really helpful to understand if the information is visible when colour isn't present, as well as setting the reading order for your screen reader. The same in Adobe. There's a program called Adobe Color that you can check the colour contrast, and it will also give you recommendations to tweak or change. And in Design as well, you can set the document features for the screen reader. So you set the ordering and the reading of it, as well as being able to do that in Adobe Acrobat. And there's lots of colour contrast checkers as well, PDF checkers and website checkers available online, where you can literally put your PDF in, put your link in, or even a colour code, and it will give you suggestions on how to fix things, make things more accessible, and often gives you your WCAG code score, as well. So those are my accessibility tips, which I hope have been helpful.
Wow, that was a bit
lot.
of a whistle-stop tour, but this is exactly what we needed to do. You know, we are very aware that everybody is very tight on time these days, so great that we've run through an awful lot in all of about 20 minutes. And the great news is this is recorded. We will send it to you so you can go back through it at your own pace. Just a quick wrap up in terms of what we've covered today. So first of all, we kind of discussed the importance of accessible communications, really remembering it's about inclusion, reaching a much wider audience, and ultimately creating just a better experience for everybody. And then Sarah has very kindly taken us through really the WCAG guidelines, which focused on the 4 key areas: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, and gave loads of top tips in different ways to ultimately provide a bit of a roadmap so that we can all create more accessible content. And the good news is, I think, from listening to all of that from you, Sarah, is that actually making your communication more accessible is actually really achievable. And if we think about it right at the beginning, then, to be honest, it's not difficult. It is straightforward. It just needs to be considered early on in the process, and much easier to do that than sort of as an addition later on. So ultimately, there's been lots of sort of examples shared here. I know that Sarah talked about certainly some resources. If there's anything in particular you want more information about, I absolutely encourage you to use the chat function. Equally, please feel free to message either Sarah or myself. We'll make sure, if they're not already, that our contact details are in there, our email addresses. You can reach out to us or on LinkedIn. That's absolutely fine. But I'd like to wrap up today with only a few minutes to go. With just a few ways in which you can get started, because it's great hearing all of this stuff, and then you kind of go away and you go, I want to do all of that, but where do I start? So let's just make this really easy for you to get stuck in. I think the first thing is just start by making one piece of communication that you're working on accessible this week. Do it now. Start as you mean to go on. That can be a really small piece of content. It can be a social media post. It could be something a bit more sizable. It could be a website update that you're working on, an internal document. It doesn't matter. Taking that first step is what really counts. The second thing I would suggest is actually go and review your own organisation's accessibility policy, if one exists. Appreciate that not everybody has these, and maybe that is something that actually you want to champion internally and start. But if you do have one, then absolutely go and take a look at it and see if there are ways in which you think you can champion and develop that further. Equally, there may be lots in there that is new news and that you can start to implement, so that's great. The third thing I would say is consider signing up for a free accessibility training course. You've obviously all signed up today, which is wonderful, and hopefully this has been really useful. But there is an absolute, ton of these sorts of training sort of courses available. This is a real whistle-stop tour today. We are very happy to talk in more depth about accessibility if that's what you want. We've also created some other resources and will continue to do so. So definitely make sure you're following our LinkedIn page, Something Big, and you will be able to get sort of the most up-to-date content through that or on our website. But not limited to us. There are so many resources available online through different professional organisations. Just go and have a Google search, or any other search engine operator is available. And ultimately, just remember, even small changes can make a really big difference. I think that for me is the biggest sort of takeaway for today. By making your kind of communication more accessible, you're ultimately creating a far more inclusive and engaging experience for everybody. So however small those changes may be, start making them, and you can sort of, size up to the bigger ones. If you've got any questions, you need any further guidance, then, as I've said, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We love talking about this. Sarah is our guru that knows everything around accessibility. It's continually, we're always learning. So equally, if you've got stuff to share with us, we'd love that. But it was lovely to have you all here today. I hope you found it useful.